Today we are hopping into our next demo dealing with typography. Today we're going to be talking specifically about how you create your own typography in Illustrator and going over some of the specifics of that. Now, there is no technical exercise that corresponds to this demo. This is actually going to be graded with the same weight and scale as a major project. But at the same time, I realize that some of you might be really into this and do something really elaborate, and some of you guys might be like, oh my gosh, this is too much, or maybe some of you guys will do something more simple. So it's kind of open to interpretation. If you're not exactly sure what I mean when I say the word typography or what that is, you've heard me talk a little bit about defont.com or online open source project sites where people are constantly uploading their own fonts that you can download and add to your own library, which is always a good idea as opposed to using those just stock or default fonts that come with Microsoft Word or Google or even just whatever comes with your computer. These offer a lot more ways to really say something through, oh wow, this one's all symbols, but to really say something through the language of typography. Like if I go under the techno category and click LCD screen, you're going to see a bunch of kind of digital looking fonts that you can download. So it's a lot of fun, and a lot of people love making typography because once you establish what the rules are in that creation process, you can essentially put out an entire alphabet that is uniquely your own, whether that's in your handwriting or something that you like to nerd out about, like something like these or whatever that might be. So I encourage you guys to have fun with this and make it a project that speaks to your interests. You're the designers and you're in control. The difference between a fully formed typography, like some of these, where the designer has clearly thought about what do lowercase letters look like, what do uppercase letters look like. I am only requiring that you create 26 letters. So off the get-go, as you're making sketches for this project or you're thinking about your approach for this project, you should gravitate towards whether or not you're going to do an all lowercase alphabet or an all uppercase alphabet. But something to note is that you're going to be turning in both your Illustrator file as well as an exported JPEG that's basically you typing in your new font with all of your letters. And that you can create in Illustrator, ideally, potentially Microsoft Word, but I want to see that you've both created the font on your own in that Illustrator file and see your process, as well as the JPEG. In order for this to work and for the program to read it and for any computer that is crunching fonts constantly to actually work, is you have to make your font 100% black. You can't make a purple font or a red font. The idea is once you've created the font and it's all black, you can always change the color of it in whatever program or software you're using to type with it. So it has to be black, and you also have to remember to remove any kinds of miscellaneous shapes or paths, and it also cannot have any strokes that are lingering. So we'll talk about how to convert strokes to shapes in this demo as well. Lastly, it has to be very graphical. You can't use photographic elements in your typography, and you can't use the blur function because these are all considered complex paths, and ultimately the program that's going to be crunching your font is not going to recognize your work if you go this route. So I'm going to start going from like finished product to how to get started on this so that you guys have an idea of the direction where we're going. And I have two past student projects currently pulled up. This is a font called Monster Mash by a former student, and I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. But you can see how all of her letters are little monsters with faces and teeth. It kind of looks like it's in pain. And they're all done in a really interesting, not over the top intricate kind of way, but they have a lot of personality. And she clearly had fun sort of with the creation of these little critters. So I would encourage you guys to absolutely sketch out some ideas, make some drawings, including various types of letters or just your overall concept. And then once you get in a flow or a groove of what this looks like, you'll start to create a set that follows a given rule. Like, for example, it looks like whenever there's negative space inside of a letter, that becomes the monster's mouth, for example. And then she makes sure to include eyeballs on all of these. They really become personified beings in her process. So that's definitely something to think about. The other thing you're probably noticing is that each letter exists on its own layer. So we'll be setting this up together, and I'll be showing you guys how to do that as we get going. And that will also be really important when you're getting to the point where you're ready to export. Now, do you have to do all of the letters on their own layer? Absolutely not. If you would prefer to have 26 artboards, that's totally fine too, but I find that it can be a little bit overwhelming at the end of the day when you have to make sure all of your file naming is correct. So just something to be aware of and mindful of. The other thing that I want to point out is that in this student's typography, when I say there's no complex paths or anything miscellaneous or outstanding, notice all of these shapes have been combined together, whether they're organic or some geometric or some that she's drawn with the pen tool. Everything is a shape. There aren't any miscellaneous paths going on, and everything's been combined. The other thing to note is that you can't have any white space, even if it looks fine looking at it on your screen here. With all of your letters, you're going to want to make sure that if you were to drag them over a layer that maybe, oops, let's grab this and tell it to be pink. There we go. If I were to drag this over, I want to make sure that that eyeball is totally transparent and see-through. I have to pull this square to the back, but this is a really good way to test this. If I just have a square hanging out that I can pull my typography in front of, I know for sure that I only have black. It's not multicolor. I don't have any white in there. So something to be aware of as you start composing your shapes that go into your typography. Let me show you another example here before we actually set up our document together. The student was really inspired by her cat for her typography, so all of the letters have a very cute sort of personality here, like the tails on the A and the B are little cat tails. The C has little cat ears. But you notice anytime there's like a tail or something sticking up, it has these little kitty cat tail stripes. So when we talk about making the rules and sticking with them, that's what we mean. I want to show you this E specifically because, and I'm going to unlock it here, because this is an example of a place where the student didn't fully go back and I'll actually turn off my guides here because we'll be creating those together. These would be considered paths that have not yet been combined together into a single shape. So this letter, if it's not edited, would technically get rejected by the program that's going to be looking at your typography. It has all of these miscellaneous paths that don't correspond to something because they're overlapping. So how do you fix an issue like this? Well, the first thing you can do, of course, is drag a box over top and see what shapes you can combine in order to get them to be just a single path and to really simplify what you're working with and dealing with here. So while I have this E selected, if I come over to the Shape Builder tool, which we used in our demo a few weeks ago, is I can start to put all of these whiskers together. Now, obviously, it turned my E the wrong color here, so I can always go back, double click that, make sure that I have that set to pure black. And I notice here that I also have some more paths to keep working with. So I'll select this whole thing again. And this, for many of you guys, might be something that you do on the back end. Like once you've gone through, you make all of your letters, and then you kind of come back and do all of the cleanup work later, because once I do this, I'm not going to have as much flexibility as far as moving things around. Other things you want to look out for, I don't know if you guys can see this as well as I can here on my screen, but you see how we have this little teeny tiny little guy hanging out? Extraneous things like that will also need to be deleted. So just something to be aware of as you're in that creation process. Now, I'm not done yet. I still have more shapes that can be potentially combined. So if I just wanted to focus on these whiskers here, I'll do this one side, and then you'll get the idea of it if I were to go and do the other side as well. Turn that back to black. But you're noticing there is some potential detail work and cleanup depending on how complex your design is. Still on the shape builder tool, so I can come through here and really make sure that I've simplified as much as possible. And now you can see my whiskers are all doing their thing. My whiskers over here, you know, I still have to go back and combine all of these together, but hopefully that helps you guys to see what that process looks like. Another thing to keep in mind is if I'm going to be using strokes, I talked about this as well. I won't be able to use the stroke as a stroke. I'll have to convert any strokes into shapes in order for it to be accepted by the program that we're going to be utilizing for this. So let's get set up with our own working space here. If you wanted to see more of these kitty letters, by the way, I can definitely show you those. I forgot because there are some cute moments in here, like the little paw print, little meow text, paw print. And you notice if there is a paw print on the eye, then her rule becomes, well, anything that has a little dot gets a little paw print. So again, an example of making the rules. This has a little kitty cat nose, which is kind of a fun use of negative space. Or ears. A hole many times gets the paw print if there's, you know, not a tail. Sometimes there is if there's a tail. So yeah, pretty fun. So how do we get started with this? Well, you're going to hit File, New, as per usual at this point. And then you're going to call this last name, first name, typography. If you have a name for your typography, you could call it like Cheeto-inspired typography. I don't know why I keep using that example, but I've always thought that a typography that looked totally like the shape of Cheetos would be hilarious. Create. Cool. Oh, you know what? There is one thing that I forgot to do. So let me try that one more time. I was getting very excited about that process, but we definitely need to have a square shape. And if you remember, our default is a letter size. So what I need to do is set that to 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. So I'm going to change my inches to pixels here and go ahead and type those in manually, which is going to be super helpful. Given that we're working on a relatively small scale here, like 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels isn't actually a whole lot of working space. You really need to make sure that you're making your characters relatively large on the artboard. And the reason for that is if you're making your image only like this big, then that's what, maybe 20 or 30 pixels. So you want to make sure that you're actually taking up a good amount of space. You don't want to draw your letters super duper small in here, or if you do, make sure you definitely take the time to go through and expand them at the end. But that is absolutely what I would recommend. The next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to create another artboard that's going to live next door to my starting place artboard. And that's for just in case I want a little bit of space for sketching, or maybe if I make my A, I move it over here, I make my B, I make a copy and move it over here, so I can kind of see the progression and the development of the rules of my typography as I'm working forward through all of my rules and my letter creation. So I'll start with Artboard 1, and we're going to start off on layer 1, and I'm going to call this layer baseline, or you could call it reference, whatever that might be. But this is essentially going to be a starting point where I pick my type tool, and I'm essentially going to just drop something right there, and the 4 letters that I need are lowercase p, lowercase d, lowercase x, and then uppercase h. And the reason why I'm picking these letters specifically is because they all have, and I'm going to hold down my shift key so I can expand them really quick. All these letters have various qualities that I would expect in an American or English, I don't know why I said American, that's very American-centric of me. They all have qualities of letters that we would expect to find. For example, the P is a good example of something that drops down. The D is a good example of something that pops up. The X is a good example of something that takes up sort of that whole space. And the H is a good example of a letter that's capital. And so we can kind of see the relationship between these. My font right now is Myriad Pro, which I can see from my character window. And if you can't see your character window, remember you can always go over to Window and then go to Type and Character, and that will pop out for you to see exactly what's going on. Myriad Pro, I think, is like my built-in default here for Illustrator. And so my uppercase H is actually shorter than my lowercase d, which is an interesting quality to this particular font. Now, I'm not using these letters or this font per se, but I am using it as a referential starting point. It's going to help me maintain my size and scale as I do start building my font so that my letters aren't scaled all over the place. So I have this written out. I might change to a slightly different font. You know, if you want to sort of lead off of a different style font, that's totally cool too. I kind of just want a regular Futura is kind of nice. Yeah. So pick a font that you like, and obviously once you're at this point, hopefully you have an idea of the direction you'd like to take your font in, and you've also thought about whether you're going to make all of your letters uppercase or all of your letters lowercase. And starting this way gives you the opportunity for later to add in those other letters that are either uppercase or lowercase as you move forward. Great. So the next step that I need to do is actually turn these letters into shapes. So I want to make sure that they're scaled pretty big inside of my artboards, so they're taking up a decent amount of space. And then the next thing I'm going to do is go to Type, Create Outlines. And Type Create Outlines is the way that you can tell your typography to go from being typography to being shapes. So once I do this, I'm not going to be able to change my font. I'm not going to be able to change you know, the very text-based elements, but I will be able to treat it as a shape. So once I do that, it all gets highlighted and you can see the paths that have formed around the outsides of my letters. So we're headed towards a great place at this point. If I click off and then grab my direct selection tool with the A shortcut button, I should be able to select any of these letters that I've put down individually. And that's great because now I need to change the color of each of these letters so I can differentiate them from each other. And I'll show you why that's important here momentarily. So it doesn't matter what colors you make your letters, pick some colors that you like. I'm going for a very spring theme, apparently, with mine. And, oh yeah. Cool. So once I have all of my letters that have different colors, and again, I use my direct selection tool to just click on one at a time, what I can do is kind of move them around here and put my P in a sort of middle point in my artboard. Then I can put my D on top of my P, but of course I want to make sure that, cool, so this kind of lines up perfect. And then I'm going to stack my X on top. Again, I'm making my own typography, so I don't have to follow all these rules necessarily, but this turns into a really good starting point, so I kind of know the direction where I'm going. Then my H, and I'm using the built-in alignment inside of Illustrator so that I know that I'm placing these in the right spot, kind of trying to get that middle point or that center intersect point to line up with everything. I don't love this H being front and center, especially if I'm going to do mine in lowercase, so I might send it to the back for now. Great. So here's my baseline or my starting point. I'm going to go ahead and lock this layer right now and add another layer, which I'm going to call my grid, because that's what we're going to make. If I go into Window and then I want to, or excuse me, if I go into View and then I want to see my rulers here, go to Grid or View, Rulers, Show Rulers. I'll get rulers up here and over here on either side. And just like in Photoshop, I can drop and drag down rulers to start delineating my workspace for my personal typography. And I'm, of course, using this one as a reference. So I'm going to drop and drag a ruler that tells me, okay, so this is where my letters start. Cool. And then drag a ruler over here. Great. This is as tall as my uppercase letters are going to get. And then a ruler over here. This is as tall as my lowercase letters that have a stem are going to get. And then I can drag a ruler over here that says this is my general workspace for like the interior part of a lowercase letter, kind of that edge of the P that I can see. And another one for the other side of the P, or the stem of the D if I want. I think it's fine either way. It doesn't have to be totally perfect. And then I definitely want to delineate the top here. How far up does the circle bulbous part of that D or P go? And how low down do I want my letters that have a stem? So this P goes down to here. It's like when you're in elementary school and you have to learn how to write all the letters inside of the lines. Some people really love that, and I feel like some people absolutely hated that. So here we go. Here is my full grid for how I can start designing my own letters. And again, depending on what your starting font is, you might choose to, move these around a little bit depending on how you want your font to look. But at least at this point, we know that this is our primary workspace for like the circle part or the bulbous part of the D or the P. We know this is how low they can drop down, and this is how tall they can go within that workspace. And I really encourage you guys to stick to those guidelines that you set up for yourself. And I'm going to lock this so that it doesn't pop up as I'm in that design process. The next thing that you'll need to do is create 26 different layers. And you're going to name them all after all 26 layers, layers in the alphabet. So if you want to fast forward through this part, it's not going to take me super long, but I will need a minute to set this up. And the important thing is that you're going through and naming each of them as well, which is something I should have mentioned. It's hard not to sing the alphabet song in your head as you're doing this. Great. So now I have established all of my layers that correspond to various letters. The next thing I need to do is, you notice we have all of our eyeballs on right now. And you don't have to start necessarily on A, but I'm just going to hold down my mouse and sort of slide up to turn off all of the eyeballs except for the one layer that I'm working on immediately. So I'll start with A, but if you feel really inspired to start with your G, by all means, go for it. You don't have to actually work in order of the alphabet if you don't want to. So if I'm creating an A, there's a couple of different ways that I could do this. One obvious way is I could use my organic options by using my, my pen tool or my curvature tool, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But alternatively, I could build my A out of shapes. So if I grab the ellipse tool, for example, and hold down my shift key, I know that I can have my A be a circle that starts here. Let's go ahead and make sure that that's filled with my true black. How do I get a circle that has a hole inside of it? Well, let's say I do this, and then I put that over there. Cool, it lines it up right in the center for me. That is fabulous. And then I select everything, and of course I can use my shape builder tool to select out those various elements. I click here and here, and then I can grab my direct selection tool and just simply, chop out the inside. And maybe part of my letter aesthetic is that I give everything like a double stem kind of thing going on. So I'll use my rectangle tool over here to create stem 1 for that A, and then I'll grab my direct selection tool, or excuse me, my regular selection tool, hold down my option key, and now I have this kind of cool line thing happening with my A. I'm not going to combine these yet, like what I showed you guys with the E that had whiskers, because in case I change my concept a little bit as we move forward, I might end up deciding that something needs to change or there's a width that needs to be a little bit different. So I'm going to keep this as is. The next thing I'm going to do is think about, well, what letter could I move to if I've kind of established that I want this like double stem and cool circle thing for my A? Well, if I open up my layers, certainly have some of those similar components with a B and a D. Not as much with the C, but we'll talk about that in a second. But let's say I want to go to my B. I could drag a box over my A here, hit Command C to copy it. I'm going to turn off my eyeball, so I am not looking at it. I'll go to my B, and I'm going to go to Edit, Paste in Place, and pasting into a locked layer. Here we go. I need to go up to my B. So I need to make sure I'm on the correct layer in addition to turning on the eyeball, and I'm going to hit paste in place. And now we have the exact same circle that's carried over and my double lines here. But with a B, the double lines obviously need to be on the left and they need to be taller than with an A. So I'm going to grab both of these little lines and move them over, but also kind of keeping them on my guide. You see how these little guides are so important when you're trying to do this? Promise they will make your process a lot easier. Maybe I even want to move this over a tad bit more. Cool. So now it's, you know, really on the other side of that B. And I'm gonna, well, I know that my lowercase letters go up this far. Cute. Now I have my B. I should probably save my work at this point. If you haven't done that yet, you are more than welcome to follow along here. Cool. I have it in my typography demo folder, and I'll save my Illustrator file. Great. So now I have my B. I can move maybe to my D, which would be very, very similar. In fact, I could do that one right now. Copy, grab the D, make sure I'm on the layer, edit, paste in place. And then I'm just going to grab these guys and move them over to the other side. A little further so it's not showing in the back. Cool. So how would you go about making a C? All of these things being said. Well, I can start by, you know, doing what we did before, paste in place. I know I'm not going to need these two bars, but I do like having that circle around, the one that I made the O out of. It was a part of the A and the B and the D. So if I need a C, I kind of need a little spot inside of it, right? So what I could do is create a sort of incision kind of shape. Let's find the center here. Yep. I hope you guys saw that flicker. It went away really fast, but you know, Illustrator really helps you to find how things are aligned. Cool. Now I know I've made an isometric, the kind of triangle that has the same isosceles. I don't know. Not great at geometry. Those of you guys who are math majors are totally winning right now. You say I have these two overlaying shapes. What I can do now is combine them just like this with my shape builder tool. I can grab my C area, I can grab that middle area, and then I can grab this whole thing, make it a triangle, and then from there I can delete this. Oh, it's a Pac-Man. I can delete this, and all of a sudden I have a C. Now, obviously the C is kind of boring. It doesn't have any of the cool effects that some of these ones have. But as you're kind of creatively thinking through what those extra added elements might be, or maybe there's something else going on besides, you know, maybe there's like a couple of interesting things that you might try, I would encourage you to do that. Now, some of you guys might think about working on this in a way that's a little bit less shape-centric and more drawing-centric. So I wanted to show you how I would advise going about it in that way. Let's say you decide to draw some shapes and you come over to your E. So you have your, actually have to be on the layer here. You still want to be super involved with, you know, what your rules that you're setting are, and also, you know, being cognizant of the shapes that you're creating. But here, I'm drawing this E completely and entirely organically. There we go. And I do have this little miscellaneous path here. So what I might need to do is grab that shape builder tool and combine them. There we go. Keep it simple. That one does not need to be there. And then I might even be able to hold down my shift key and get that to fit within the box. But maybe, for example, I want the inside of this super organic E to be like a star or something. So I'll create a star, it's a little big. Maybe all my letters are sort of goopy, but then the inside of them, they have a little star like that. And then I can use my shape builder tool to differentiate those. And then delete it out. And then of course, I just want to make sure that as I'm building these, that I'm constantly checking to make sure that if I drag them or a copy of them onto like a colored box, put that box in the background here. And this could ultimately even be its own layer if you're wanting to have it there for all of your letters. It could be a good way to kind of manage that. Good. So I know now that my E is solid. So that's an interesting way, you know, drawing with the curvature tool. And then, you know, you would essentially say, well, any letter that has a middle point, like the A, the B, the D, would have a star in it, or maybe even it comes in and becomes, you know, an insertion with like the C letter, for example. You might decide, you know, even with a really organic letter like a G, which has a lot of curves in its lowercase version and uppercase version, maybe you go for like a really like robotic style, and for you it makes sense to use the pen tool in its very geometric way. It's kind of a weird G. I don't know about that. I think I messed something up with my anchor points here. I'm going to hit the V button and then see if I can fix it, but I was kind of all over the place with that one, so that one might be a little bit of a mess up. Oh, I can still combine that together and push some things around and get this where I want it to be. I'm going to grab this little anchor point and try to bring it in maybe. I actually need my Cool. I just got rid of that anchor point, so it comes in a little bit. If I wanted to add, you know, a curved effect to it, I could do that, just like what you guys learned with the shapes. This one's a little bit sloppy, but hopefully you get the idea. The last thing that's really important to mention if you're going to use shapes that have a stroke to them, which can be very, very cool, you need to make sure that you turn that stroke into a shape, which I mentioned a couple of times. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Let's grab, you know, and actually it's important to mention that this will be super important if you sort of draw out your letters as strokes instead of shapes. So like, let's say I'd made this E. Let me start that over. Let's say I made the E with a pen that doesn't have a fill, but instead has a stroke. So we'll give it a black stroke. And we'll give it 0 fill. So now if I go and start drawing with my curvature tool, that's a little bit better because I want it to have a sort of flowy handwriting look. There's my E. I'm going to hit V to go back, and then I'll, you know, maybe say my stroke stays at 18 point throughout. You can totally go through and make your letters utilizing the stroke function in any capacity, or even using the stroke on a shape, which can look really cool. But because the path is on the inside of the stroke, what you'll need to do is go up to path, object, path, outline stroke. And you notice what happens is it transforms it into an outline. So now it's no longer modifiable as a path, but rather as a whole thing being outlined. And if you wanted to even take it a step further, let's say, now of course I have this E. What if we now gave it a stroke again? This is going to get super meta. And we, maybe we make the fill, the fill needs to be 0. I don't know why I keep doing that. I guess it's second nature. But we make the stroke of that E a little bit thicker. Now I'm getting something really quite interesting, and I would again have to make sure that I went into Object, Path, Outline Stroke. Again, you can do this at the end. You don't have to do it all right now, but something to keep in mind. I totally drew this E where the G was supposed to be, so oops. But something to think about using this other artboard for is, as you're creating your alphabet, is you could move some of your letters just so that you can kind of see the progression of your alphabet, just by hitting Option click, so that you have a kind of like working space. I think I squished that one a little bit. Yeah, I did. Holding down the Shift key. So you can kind of see all of your letters placed next to each other. Oh, and I would want to then, while I'm on the A layer, I'd want to Command X, that, and maybe make another layer that's kind of underneath everything and call that full alphabet or the alphabet, and then that stays on. I hit Command V, and I can see that develop as I'm working on my set of letters. Let's do one more before I go here that you guys might enjoy. If I go ahead and combine these ones together, great. And then what I'm going to do is eliminate the fill here and give it a stroke. Now it's starting to look also very cool, very different, kind of like spacey, which I like. Oh yeah. So utilizing that stroke on top of not just shapes, or not just lines, but also on shapes is quite cool. But again, I have to go to Object, Path, Outline Strokes. So these become actual shapes. And then what I want to do is just double check that at the end of the day, like something like this path chilling out in the middle here, I'd want to make sure that I went through with my shape builder tool and made sure that those are all combined together. So I don't have any of those miscellaneous interior paths just hanging out. So I'll hit Command S to save again. But hopefully this gives you a good idea on how you can start to build out your typography. In the next demo, we're going to talk about how to export your letters and how to utilize the IcoMoon app in order to actually turn your typography into a real usable font that you can use on your computer for the rest of your life. Maybe not to write like an essay in for another class, but maybe, who knows? So if you haven't checked this out, you might consider going, I guess I didn't totally add that. Let me show you before I leave today a couple of examples of student work from the typography project. I know I showed you a couple, maybe there's one or two more that I could pull up for you here. That might help to think about this. It's pretty small. Yeah, so here's one other one I'll show you guys. This one, the student created a whole typography that was all sort of these squiggles or snakes, which is really cool. So you might think about doing something kind of organic like this, but you can see how he's thoughtfully put the little rattler or the little end of the tail here in every image. Like there's this little taper moment. Every single letter has an eye, and every single letter has a little tongue sticking out. In some cases, the eyes are little dead X's, which is funny, like they're standing up super straight up. And then some of them, the eyes are just normal. But think about elements like that that might really help to unify your set. Like, what are those recurrent themes or things? And, you know, your letters or your typography could be very, you know, geometric, and they could be very architectural. They don't have to be based off of an animal or a Cheeto or, you know, anything like that. I think, you know, this is a great opportunity for you to problem solve through something that might be interesting for you to explore as you build out your own personal typography. So let me know if you have any questions on this one, and I really look forward to seeing the development of your work. Thanks, everyone.